I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No, no room for hate. No room for hate. You can wave a flag above it, you can quote a verse or two, you can dress it up like justice till it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place. No room for hate. No room for hate. No room for hate. Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start where the anger breaks.
Where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up where the hurt gives way.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name is Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the, oh my God, it's Monday again edition of the Rick Robinson Show. Sorry for that bit of dead air on some of the feeds. One of my sliders was in the wrong spot. But it is Monday, and yes, we're later than normal. I'm testing out something because we had really good numbers when I was doing the earlier show, and then I moved a little later because prep time was easier, and then the numbers sucked. So I'm seeing if sliding a little bit later helps or not before I decide if I'm going to start kicking myself in the butt and making myself get up early again. Please come pay attention to me at this later time slot so I can be a little bit lazier. Anyway, I work all the time, for those of you who don't know. Welcome into the program again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rick Robinson. We are live, and we have a leprechaun sighting in the chat. Hi Z, how's things? Anyway, so we're here, we're live, and this is going to be a bit of a different show. There's been a show that has been on my mind and for a while now, and yeah, so that's what this one's going to be about today. I almost made it in America Off the Rails, but I figured it would wind up being too long of a show, and I didn't really want to split it up into two parts. It still may be longer than 2 hours because I didn't time it. So anyway, welcome into the program, friends. Again, this is the Rick Robinson Show at a slightly later time. So in God's time zone, I'm joining you during your lunch break instead of right before. But again, we are live, and we're going to start with a thought I posted earlier because I think it hit a nerve. And honestly, after digging through the data, I'm not sure the thought was harsh enough. I said, and I quote, the Republican Party never learned its lesson after Reagan granted amnesty on the promise that Democrats would work with him to fix immigration. The party has been the kid brother trying to appease the angry big brother ever since. And if we do not wake up, eventually it will not matter because the DSA is now firmly rooted on the other side, thanks to centralized education. A lot of people under 30 think this country deserves to go the way of the dinosaur. Anyway, I will not ever stop doing what I can, but those of us who truly love and understand America are starting to feel like a dying breed. Now, that sounds like a rant, which, I mean, they don't call me rowdy for nothing. And I do understand that because, you know, I have met me. I see me in the mirror every morning. But sometimes the rant comes first and the research catches up later. And this time the research did not, in point of fact, calm me down. It made what I thought was a rant look a lot more restrained because we are starting to look into the whole decline of patriotism in this country. And I have to say, I think it happened by design because, of course, we're starting to look at things like America 250, America's 250th birthday, 250 years since the Declaration of Independence was signed. This should be the easiest cultural layup in American history, you know, complete with flags, fireworks, small town parades. The founders, Yorktown, Gettysburg, Normandy, the moon landing, baseball fields lit up at dusk, kids wearing red, white, and blue and asking why everyone is suddenly pretending to understand the second verse of the Star-Spangled Banner, which, yes, even confuses me. This shouldn't be hard, though, but somehow America 250 feels muted, awkward, overmanaged, politicized, corporate cautious. Everybody's tiptoeing around the birthday cake like somebody might pop out of it and file an HR complaint. And this is where today's show starts. But before we can get into the meat of today's show, we kind of have to start from the beginning. Because I hear everybody who wasn't 3 talking about the bicentennial, talking about how awesome it was. What if I told you that I am fairly certain if you know, current behavior is the best indication of future behavior, and the best indication of past behavior is current behavior. I'm pretty sure if we flip that around a bit, with as much as the Democrats seem to hate America now, I'm pretty sure a lot of them probably did back then. So what if I told you, because think about this from another perspective, 1976, parties everywhere, red, white, and blue buntings, the American Freedom Train running the country. Yes, I know how dirty that sounds in retrospect now, but it was the 70s. Just saying. And all of that, and then 3 years later, they found the Department of Education. Coinkydink? Probably not. And that's where today's show starts. America 250 is not struggling because Americans suddenly stopped loving their country overnight. It is struggling because for decades, the institutions that were supposed to pass America down treated history as if it were optional, civics as if it were expendable, patriotism as suspicious, or as the kids say, a little sus, and national memory as something that did not count on the test. And when civic memory leaves the room, do not be shocked when socialism walks in carrying a clipboard and a candidate slate. We're going to get into some of that later today as well. So today, we're going to connect all the dots, all the things that nobody ever really wants to talk about, and all the quiet parts people never want to say out loud. We're going to talk about the decline in patriotism. We're going to talk about what happened when education got more centralized and more test-driven. We're going to talk about the report card, reading, math, civics, U.S. history. We're going to talk about when history and civics got pushed to the edge of the school day. And then we're going to talk about what moves into that empty space when a country stops teaching its own story. Because America 250 is the symptom, the civic report card is the diagnosis, and the socialist candidate pipeline is one of the consequences. So let's start with the basic question. When did patriotism become a brand risk? Why does America's 250th birthday feel like it needs a risk management department? We used to be able to celebrate America without first asking a focus group whether the flag tested well with suburban, awful white women. I said what I said. But now patriotism itself feels like a brand risk. Corporations want the red, white, and blue when it sells trucks, beer, fireworks, and Memorial Day mattresses, but they also want just enough distance from actual patriotism that nobody accuses them of having a problematic relationship with the Constitution. Because, if the Constitution in America had Facebook pages, the relationship status right now would probably be marked. It's complicated. Just saying. Hollywood used to know how to make patriotic movies, not perfect movies, not propaganda. Some of them were, but movies that understood America was worth fighting for, worth arguing over, worth preserving. Now even the country's 250th birthday feels like an event that half the culture class would rather observe from an undisclosed location. And to be fair, America 250 is not literally flopping everywhere. There are official events, there are local events. Philadelphia and other places are doing major celebrations. There are plenty of normal Americans who still plan to fly the flag, fire up the grill, argue something or grill something, argue about whether the fireworks started too late. If it's dark, it's not too late, and love the country without needing permission. But the national cultural mood, it's a little weird. And the reason it's weird is actually measurable. Gallup's Jeffrey M. Jones reported in 2025. Hang on just a second, because I am my own producer and I want to put this on the screen. All right, so American pride by party, according to Gallup. Republicans 92%, Independents 53%, Democrats 36%. Oh, I have a troll in the chat. Lucky for you, I don't have time for you today, so you can feel free to either keep ranting or leave. I don't really care, because I have lots of show notes to get through. So let that sink in for just a second. According to Gallup's Jeffrey M. Jones, as reported in 2025, only 58% of U.S. adults said they were extremely or very proud to be American. Gallup called that the lowest level in its trend. So let that sink in. We are heading into America's 250th birthday, and only 58% of adults say they are extremely or very proud to be an American. That's not a marketing problem. That's a national identity problem. And when you break the number down by party, the fracture gets even clearer. Gallup found Republicans at 92%, Independents at 53%, and Democrats at 36%. So pride in America has not disappeared. It is sorted. It has become sorted by party. It's sorted by age. It is sorted by worldview. It is sorted by whether a person sees America as an inheritance to preserve or a system of oppression to dismantle. We went from around 90% after 9/11 to 58% before America's 250th birthday. That's not a branding problem. That's a country forgetting how to tell its own story. And it gets worse when you look at younger Americans. Gallup found that from 2021 to 2025, only 41% of Gen Z adults said they were extremely or very proud to be American, compared with 83% of the silent generation. Now, I do not say that to sneer at young people. Well, maybe a little. Young people did not invent the classrooms they sat in. They did not design the curriculum fights. They did not create the colleges. They did not build the entertainment industry. They did not create the activist pipelines. They did not decide which subjects got squeezed out of the school day. Older generations did that. So the question is not what is wrong with these kids. The question is, what did we fail to hand them? Because if you hand a generation criticism without gratitude, grievance without inheritance, activism without civic memory, and rights without responsibility, do not act shocked when they grow up unsure whether the country is worth preserving. Young people did not fail to inherit America. A lot of them were never properly handed America in the first place. Desiree News tied this directly to the America 250 moment. Their polling with the Hinckley Institute and Morning Consult found that 69% nationally say they are somewhat or very patriotic. That may sound decent at first, but again, we're talking about the 250th anniversary of the country. This ought to be the year patriotism is the easiest sell in America. Instead, even patriotism looks like a divided household budget item. Desiree's numbers show Republicans at 82% patriotic and Democrats at 61%. So even when the wording is broader, somewhat or very patriotic, the split is still there. America's 250th should be a layup. Somehow we turn the country's birthday into another group project where half the class refuses to put its name on the poster. And Pew gave us the next layer. Pew's Research Center asked Americans what makes them proud of their country. The top volunteered answer was freedom, but only 22% named it. 1 in 5 Americans gave a negative or critical response when asked what makes them proud. Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents were much more likely than Republicans to answer negatively. And here's the American 250 gut punch. Only 3% of Americans mentioned U.S. history as something that makes them proud. 3%. The founding fathers and the founding of our nation are turning 250 years old this year in the national imagination, and Pew says only 3% of Americans thought to mention our history as a reason they are proud. That is how you know the fireworks are not the problem. The problem is that people do not know how to celebrate. The problem is that too many people were never taught what the celebration actually means, and that brings us to the biggest crux of the problem, which, believe it or not, happens to be education. All right, so give me just a second here. All right, so getting into the education problem, because this is actually the crux of where all of this comes from. We don't care about America, stupid. Yeah, that's good. That's awesome. So why are you here then? Yeah, well, so does your mom. Okay, yeah. Jimmy, you get to go bye-bye. Had enough of you. All right. Anyway, sorry. Had to deal with a troll for those of you listening and watching live. I apologize for the disruption, but I let him have his say. He spammed my chat for a good several minutes and never came to any logical conclusions about anything. So he's officially been booted and removed in every way possible. All right. So back to the notes. So patriotism doesn't actually maintain itself. And as we've been talking about today, the report card for America came back red, white, and bruised. A country has to pass itself down. That happens through families, churches, civics groups, local traditions, neighborhoods, stories around the dinner table, grandparents who remember things, veterans who explain things, parents who stand up, take off your hat. That flag means something. But schooling matters too. For most kids, school is where they first encounter America as more than just a place where they happen to live. School is where they should learn what rights are, where rights come from, why the Declaration matters, why the Constitution matters, and why federalism should matter, why free speech matters, why religious liberty matters, why limited government matters. I'd like to talk to you about my friend Minarchy at some point today. Why America's failures matter, but also why America's ideals should and do still matter. And if the school system teaches America mainly as a list of sins, failures, hypocrisies, and systems of oppression, students may learn criticism, but they may never learn gratitude. And if the school system teaches reading and math, but starves history and civics, students may learn how to function, maybe, inside the country without ever understanding why the country exists. A republic cannot survive on consumers alone. It needs citizens. Now we need to be careful here. I'm not going to do the lazy version of the argument. I'm not going to say the Department of Education was created in 1980 and patriotism died, although corollary is kind of there, but it's still too simple. That's too easy to knock down. The federal role in education did not begin in 1980. The big federal doorway opened in 1965 with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act under Lyndon Johnson. That was the War on Poverty era, and Democrats controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate. So the federal education machine did not start in 1980. The front door opened in 1965. A lot of folks don't actually talk about that. In 1980, Washington just gave it an office with better furniture. The Department of Education itself says Congress passed the Department of Education Organization Act in October of 1979, and the department began operations in May of 1980. Jimmy Carter was president. Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. The department was created by combining education offices from other federal agencies. That's the hinge, but I want to stop there for a second. Remember, this all started in 1965. What else was happening in 1965? Most of America, especially the younger generations, were very ticked off about what was happening overseas and our involvement in things like, say, Vietnam and Korea before that. And so, yeah, there was a reason that all of this kind of started back then. And again, that's the hinge. So in 1980, Washington didn't just fund education. Again, it gave education a cabinet office, a bureaucracy, and eventually a national steering wheel. Again, the claim is not the Department of Education magically destroyed patriotism. The claim is that education became more centralized, a lot more bureaucratic, and more test-driven. The system did not produce stronger civic knowledge, stronger historical literacy, or literacy for that matter, or stronger patriotic attachment. If anything, the opposite happened, and politically, this is not a clean one-party indictment. I mean, it is true that Democrats had control of the steering wheel for much more time than this, but there were several times when Republicans had control and they didn't change direction. Remember, Reagan said, and when he ran and got elected in 1980 and was sworn in 1981, one of the very first things he was going to do was do away with the National Department of Education. Donald Trump in his first term said he was going to do away with the Department of Education. Donald Trump in his now bifurcated second term said he was going to do away with the Department of Education. He even, during one of the cabinet meetings, put Linda McMahon, sorry for a second, I blanked on her last name for some reason, on blast and said, I want you to eventually put yourself out of business. Now, whether that will happen or not remains to be seen. I'm not so sure because both sides like having control of the levers that help with indoctrination. We've talked about that on this show before. The very idea of a 12-year education system came from research run by the Rockefellers, because the Rockefellers wanted to find out, and they commissioned studies to do this, how long it takes to basically indoctrinate someone. And all the studies came back with the same answer. It takes about 12 years. So then the Rockefellers, who wanted people that were smart enough to work their machinery and not really smart enough to say, why do I keep doing the same monotonous, boring ass job every day, basically started doing philanthropic work to change our school system. So no, this didn't all start all at once, but it started for a very simple reason. The rich folks, which I'm not slamming, by the way, I want to be one of them someday. I mean, according to most of the world, you and I already are, even if we're broke. But that's something else we don't really talk about very much. But that's the thing. The rich folk, mainly the Rockefellers, who also started the idea of this whole scarcity thing when it came to fossil fuels, which aren't actually fossil fuels, started the process to have not education, but indoctrination. And that started in the early 1900s. So as this has continued, the opposite has continued to happen. So again, this isn't a clean one-party indictment because each side has had control of it and neither has done anything really that much different. Democrats built much of the federal education architecture. Republicans helped install the testing machinery. Obama-era Democrats added the grant money leash, and now both parties are standing in the wreckage arguing over who left the stove on. Here's the quick timeline. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson and a Democratic Congress opened the major federal K-12 funding doorway with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. In 1979 and 1980, Jimmy Carter and a Democratic Congress created the cabinet-level Department of Education. In 1994, Bill Clinton and a Democratic Congress pushed the standards and accountability model further with goals 2000 and the Improving America Schools Act. Then in 2001 and 2002, George W. Bush led No Child Left Behind, which got perverted into pass them no matter what. Republicans controlled the White House and the House Democrats controlled the Senate after Jim Jeffords switched, and the No Child Left Behind passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. That is where Republicans helped build the federal scorecard they later blamed for narrowing the game. Then under Barack Obama, Race to the Top used federal grant leverage to push state reforms and align standards. Washington learned it did not have to command every state. It could put money on the table and call the leash an incentive. So if we're being honest, this was a bipartisan march towards the centralization of the American education system. Different fingerprints, same direction, which is also a recurring theme of this show. The establishment, which is both sides, want us going the same direction. The only difference is one side of the establishment, the Democratic side, wants us to get there on the equivalent of a bullet train, hoping we get there so fast that you don't notice. The Republican side of the establishment wants to get us there on a handcar, hoping to move us so slowly that by the time we get there, you've fallen asleep and you didn't notice. And sadly, both plans are kind of working. So again, if we're being honest, this was a bipartisan march towards centralization. I know that was a lot of policy plumbing, so let me put it this way. We built the machine. Now let's look at what the actual machine is produced. The report card is underwhelming at best and devastating where it matters most for America 250. NAEP long-term trend data shows that age 9 reading was ranked 215 in 280 and is 215 in 2022, otherwise known as flat. Age 13 reading was 258th in 1980 and 256th in 2023, slightly down. Age 17 reading was 285 in 1980 and 287 in 2020, again, basically flat. Now, it doesn't have a lot of pandemic era data because they're afraid to release those numbers. After 40 years of national reform, national standards, national testing, national money, and national bureaucracy, fourth grade age reading is right back where it was when Reagan was running against Carter. Math is a little more complicated, as it probably should be, and we need to be honest about that. Math is not a clean 40-year collapse. Age 9 math actually improved from 219th in 1978 to 234th in 2022. Age 13 math went from 264th in 1978 to 271st in 271. I guess that's out of every maybe that's out of every 1,000 students. I should have double checked those numbers. In 2023, that's age 17. In age 17 math went from 300 in 1978 to 306. So yes, there were in fact math gains, but recent trends are bad. Age 9 math dropped from 244 in 2020 to 234 in 2022. And I'm going to double check those numbers when we go to break in a second, because we're actually past time for break anyway. So I'm going to figure out where those numbers, where we pulled those numbers from, because my notes aren't very clear on that. But we are going to take a quick break, and I'm going to double check some of this math, because, you know, as I just pointed out, math is actually kind of complicated. But my name's Rick Robinson. This is my show. We'll be back in just a minute.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change.
right, welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's Monday. I know we're doing math on a Monday, which if my programming director friend is listening, he's going to be mad about because we usually reserve math for Sundays. But I did find my point of confusion because I left something important off the notes. So all of those numbers that I am giving you is out of a possible score of 500, which is the scale that the groups use. So yeah, so that's why I was like, wait a minute, if things are going up, then it's obviously not the percentile ranking, which is how the notes originally made me think. So yeah, I had to do some checking while we were on break, but we're back. And just to make sure the notes make sense from now on, when I'm talking about the numbers, what we're actually talking about is, as an example, age 13 math dropped from 285 out of a possible score of 500 to 271 in 2023. Math is actually not a clean 40-year collapse. It is something almost more frustrating. We made gains, built a giant system around those gains, and then watched the gains start leaking out of the bucket. But civics and U.S. history are where the America 250 argument gets its teeth. NAEP and the National Assessment Governing Board reported that in 2022, only 22% of eighth graders were at or above proficiency in civics. Only 22%. And U.S. history was even worse. In 2022, only 13% of eighth graders were at or above proficient in U.S. history. 13%. If only 13% of eighth graders are proficient in U.S. history, do not be shocked when America's 250th birthday feels less like a national celebration and more like an awkward office party for a boss nobody really knows. You cannot starve kids of history and civics for 12 years and then act surprised when they do not tear up during the fireworks. And that brings us to the mechanism, because the next question is obvious. Did schools stop teaching history and civics all at once? Was there a meeting? Did somebody walk into the teacher's lounge and say, all right, from now on, America's extra credit? No, it happened in waves. It happened through incentives. It happened through testing. It happened through accountability systems. It happened through the most dangerous freeze in bureaucracy. We're just measuring outcomes. So America 250 feels weirdly awkward because patriotism is weaker, thinner, and more divided. The data shows pride in America is at a record low overall, deeply split by party, and much weaker among younger Americans. Then we looked at the education machine. More centralization, more bureaucracy, more testing, more national architecture, and we asked the obvious question: did that machine produce produce stronger civics knowledge? The answer, a resounding no. Reading is basically flat over decades. Math has a mixed record with recent declines, and civics and U.S. history are downright embarrassing. So now, how exactly did we get here? What gets tested and gets taught? Here's the thing. History and civics did not vanish in one day. The Sandra Day O'Connor Institute has described civic education as beginning to significantly decline in the 1960s. Again, what was happening in the 1960s? That matters because it means civics was already limping before Washington gave education a cabinet office. The problem is the national machine did not heal it. It built a bigger machine around it. Then came the standards movements of the 1990s, where education increasingly bent towards what could be measured, compared, tested, and reported. Reading and math became dominant because reading and math were easier to test. They were easier to put on a spreadsheet. And let's be honest, I almost understand this to a point, because if you can teach children how to read and teach them how to read proficiently, and you assume, there's the problem, that parents are still going to be teaching their children about, one, their family history, their ties to how they came to this country if they weren't here originally, and how far back that goes, etc., then by focusing on the analytical side of things and trying to make sure kids had a better grasp in reading fundamentals and math fundamentals, that actually makes that a little bit easier. And again, I'm going to say this. My kids hated me when they were growing up, because I realized that they weren't being taught these things in school anymore, so I started assigning them extra homework every week. They hated me then, not so much now. But again, reading and math became dominant because they were easy to track. They fit much easier into a spreadsheet. They were easier to compare, easier to tie to funding request, any waivers that they were eligible for, penalties, ratings, and bureaucratic consequences. And again, do not misunderstand me. As I just said a moment ago, reading matters, math matters. From a logical perspective, focusing on those two things should have made everything else much simpler. Because I mean, let's face it, math is the most fundamental science known to man. And you can't really understand much of anything else, like the other sciences, without reading. Nobody's arguing that kids should graduate without knowing how to read, write, count, or avoid being financially mugged by compound interest. But citizenship is not formed by reading and math scores alone. A republic actually needs civic memory. It needs people who understand why the Constitution is not just old parchment. It needs people who know that rights do not come from the government. It needs people who know that the First Amendment is not a suggestion box. It needs people who know that federalism is not a typo. It needs people who know that limited government is not cruelty. It is one of the ways free people keep power from becoming all powerful and from their government becoming their God. But the school day started bending toward whatever could be measured, and America's story became harder to fit onto a spreadsheet. Then, No Child Left Behind made the squeeze measurable. Center on Education policy data summarized by the American Historical Association found that 36% of surveyed districts decreased time for social studies, and among districts that increased time for English or math, 51% cut social studies by an average of 90 minutes per week. The MacArthur Foundation summary of the same Center on Education policy work said more than 70% of surveyed districts reduced instructional time in at least one subject to make more time for reading and math. That's the mechanism. They did not have to ban history. They just built a system where history did not count on the scoreboard. And the silliest thing about this is, I'll be honest, I mean, I was always good at reading. I started reading at age 4. I remember my parents freaking out when I was sitting in our living room and started reading Dr. Seuss book Things in a People House at age 4. And my parents were looking at each other going, is he actually reading that right now? Or has he just memorized it? It was actually a little bit of both because I had a good memory, but it also helped me start putting the words together. However, the irony of them trying to focus on reading more while removing history, which, let's face it, had already been basically bastardized because history became social studies. But you didn't have to remove it since most of social studies was reading anyway. So it could have been a mechanism for kids who didn't really enjoy reading very much, but maybe liked hearing about American history, to give them an incentive to actually read more. But instead, it was first turned into social studies and then eventually mostly gotten rid of anyway or made an elective. So when something doesn't count on the scoreboard, it becomes easier to push aside. What gets tested gets taught. What does not get tested gets treated like a luxury. And eventually, what gets treated like a luxury becomes optional. That's how a country slowly moves its own story to the edge of the school day. Not in one dramatic moment, not with one villain twirling a mustache, not with one memo titled Operation Make Children Hate the Revolution, although it seems like it might actually be a thing nowadays. It was a dimmer switch. Year after year, civics got a little darker, history got a little thinner, and patriotism got treated like an elective. At some point along the way, learning about the country became extra credit. Now, let's connect this back to the under 30 problem. When I said earlier that too many people under 30 think America deserves to go the way of the dinosaur, I know that sounds harsh, but I do not mean every young person. I didn't mean even most young people as individuals. I mean, there's a formation problem. There's a whole generation that was handed more critique than context, more grievances than gratitude, more activism than citizenship. As a matter of fact, they've been told activism equals citizenship, which is just kind of dumb. More slogans than constitutional literacy. We taught them America was a crime scene and then acted shocked when they didn't want to live in the house anymore. Oddly enough, though, they still never left. And here is where conservatives need to be honest too. This is not only the fault of schools. Families dropped the ball. I say this on this show all the time. During my children's formative years, for the most part, I was building a company. I was working 20 to 22-hour days. So I wasn't always there. Yes, we showed up to the parent-teacher conferences. Yes, we went to the PTA meetings. Yes, I even gave them extra homework. But I wasn't always as engaged as I should have been. And it's why some of this stuff even got past me until roughly 2009, 2010, when I realized that the man, even though he hadn't been elected yet, his policies or his projected policies were already starting to damage the economy. So again, churches dropped the ball. Civic groups declined. Local newspapers disappear. Social media ate everybody's attention span for lunch. Entertainment turned patriotism into a punchline. University radicalized the teachers, who then trained the next teachers, who were radicalized even further. But schools are still central because schools are where a society formalizes what it thinks and what it thinks the next generation needs to know. And apparently, for too long, we decided that America itself could wait. We decided history could wait. We decided civics could wait. We decided our national story could wait. And now America 250 is here, standing at the door, asking if anybody remembers why this particular day matters as much as it should. And this is why the next point that we're about to get into matters, because when a country stops teaching its own story, somebody else teaches a replacement story. And in comes groups like the Democratic Socialists of America. When you do not explain ordered liberty, somebody sells revolution instead. When you do not teach constitutional limits, somebody else promises unlimited governance. When you do not teach gratitude for inherited freedom, somebody else teaches contempt for inherited guilt. The DSA did not have to defeat American civics. It just had to show up after American civics had already left the room. Now, in the second hour, we're going to talk about that pipeline. We're going to talk about DSA-backed, DSA-endorsed, and socialist-aligned candidates, the broader activist ecosystem, and why this is not just a few campus radicals handing out flyers by the student union. This is organized, it is intentional, it is electoral, and it is showing up in Democratic primaries. And then we're going to talk about the Republican failure to understand the difference between a policy debate and an institutional fight, because the GOP kept thinking it was negotiating over policy. The left understood it was fighting over formation. And this takes us back to one of the points that I made in the post that I was talking about at the open of the show. The Republican Party was formed to fix a major grievance in this country, at least if you buy the modern historical narrative. Now, I will say this: history is not always accurate. History is framed by the winners. Yes, slavery was the biggest push point to drag the North into the Civil War, but slavery was actually already on its way out the door because of the Industrial Revolution. So this actually became more of a fight over states' rights than anybody's willing to admit. This is part of the reason why the party switch idea has taken root so much, because we've been the ones screaming and yelling about states' rights for about as long as I've been in politics. And that was the battle cry of the Democrats at the time, who were all Southerners. And that's why they say, well, there obviously was a party switch, but there really wasn't. That we just started to understand that states' rights really do matter, because what happened was, and this was key to the changes post-Civil War, we went from calling ourselves these United States of America, which were basically a loose conglomeration of separate countries, which is where the word State Department comes from, who came together for three common purposes, to a more centralized government. So the centralization process started even well before 1965. It actually was a byproduct of the Civil War, because post-Civil War in the Reconstruction era, I almost said Reagan, Lincoln looked at everything and said, hey, this can't ever happen again. So we need to strengthen the centralization of our nation. And that was done by changing one word. We stopped referring to ourselves as these United States of America and became the United States of America. Now, as far as the grievance class, there's another thing that needs to be discussed because it isn't being taught in history. We are told white men were evil. We came to this continent and we did terrible things. But that's not really true. We came to the continent, we settled, and we actually tried to get along with the indigenous people. The problem started happening when the chiefs, who you might as well say were the conservatives of the time because they were trying to conserve their way of life, became concerned because Christianity was starting to make inroads with the native population, which I refuse to call indigenous because we were all nomads once upon a time. So indigenous is just kind of granted, it's a long-term lie, but it's still a lie. But the truth of it is, the chiefs were pissed because the concept of love thy neighbor didn't really go so well with their favorite idea of, murder thine enemy and rape thine women for fun. Yeah, those two things didn't go together. So part of the problem that we have is we have people who don't understand history trying to talk about history. And I've said this, I said this the other day, and this is part of the problem. I am of two minds of the information age. Insert Gemini joke here. I get it. But because it's given me the freedom to do this and to be able to write for a living and all the other things that I do to make money now, but it also has created a lot of folks who put out clickbait BS as if it's tied to some sort of a Pulitzer Prize winning masthead. Yeah. To that I say caveat lector, which is let the reader beware for those of you who don't speak Latin. But the rest of it's kind of bad because we've gone from the beginning of it was the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news cycle because there always had to be something to fill the space. There always had to be something to fill the space. And it didn't matter what it was. And if you got it wrong and you had to do a retraction later, cool, whatever. But it's when the idea of news for the sake of news became a for-profit kind of thing. And that was also very long running in the making, but kind of culminated with the whole Watergate thing. Because news people figured out they could be celebrities too. And woof, we kind of went just really, really south from there. All right, so we are back around to top of the hour. We're going to take the top of the hour break. When we come back, again, we're going to talk about Republican failure to understand the difference between a policy debate and an institutional fight. Because the Democrats have known that for a long time, and they made it very clear when they stabbed Ronald Reagan in the back after he granted amnesty and said, yeah, fix this, and then we'll help you fix the rest. Yeah, that didn't happen. Anyway, my name's Rick Robinson. This is my show. We'll be back. Stay tuned.
I've seen the fire in our nation's eyes when anger prowls for prey. I've heard good people draw their lines and call it holy rage. But the cross was never raised to bless the stones we throw. And if mercy leaves the house, there's something wrong down in the soul. Words ain't bullets, but they can hit the same. And once a heart turns cold enough, it forgets what grace is for. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home. no place.
No room for hate.
Oh, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
You can wave a flag above it. You can quote a verse or two. You can dress it up like justice. Tell it almost sounds like truth. But outrage ain't righteous when it changes with the side. And you can't love your neighbor, treating them like they're downrange. We're all image bearers, breath of God and dust. And you don't heal a broken land by teaching it not to trust. There's no room for hate. Oh, in America tonight, no room in the home. Oh, where the children need the light, no room in the heart. Oh, where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
No room for hate.
Drag it to the cross, lay it in the ground. Let the blood of Jesus turn the whole thing around. Truth can still be spoken, courage still can't stand, but rage don't get to rule the soul of a faithful man. There's no room for hate in America tonight. No room in the home where the children need the light. No room in the heart, oh, where the Savior's supposed to stay. If Jesus owns the house, then hatred don't got no place.
Let revival start.
Oh,
Where the anger breaks.
where the anger breaks.
Let healing rise up.
Oh,
Where the hurt gives way.
no room for hate.
No room for hate.
No, no room for hate.
No room for hate.
Not in Jesus' name. Oh, not in this house. Not in this heart. Not in His name. No room for hate.
Remember when entertainment was actually entertaining? When comedy was about being funny, movies were about telling great stories, and you didn't need a political lecture every time you hit play. Great entertainment still exists, it's just getting harder to find. Even the biggest streaming platforms leave audiences disappointed. That's why there's Studio TST, pure entertainment, real comedy, independent films, bold creators, movies, comedy, music, and more, and the home of fearless sketch comedy. That show tonight, entertainment the way you want it. Funny, creative, unapologetic, and agenda-free. Studio TST, the future of entertainment starts here. Join Studio TST today for just $5 a month.
Hello, friends. Do you have a moment so that we may discuss our Lord and Savior Minarchy? No, seriously, I'm just kidding. Hi, my name's Rick Robinson. I am the general manager of KLRNradio.com. We are probably the largest independent podcast network that you've never heard of. We have a little bit of everything, and by that, what I mean to tell you is we have news, pop culture, special events, conspiratainment, true crime, mental health shows, drama productions, and pretty much everything in between. So if you're looking for a new podcast home to grab a little bit of everything that you love all in one place, come check us out. You can find us on X under @KLRNradio. You can find us on our Rumble and our YouTube channels under the same names. You can also find us at KLRNradio.com and pretty much every podcast catcher known to man. So again, feel free to come check us out anytime you like at KLRNradio.
In uncertain times, we could use someone to lean on. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma will stand by you with plan options to fit your budget. If you've recently lost your job, had a baby, or moved, you can still get the healthcare coverage you and your family need. Financial help may be available for those who qualify. Call 855-452-BLUE or visit hereforyouok.com to see if you're eligible to enroll. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Oklahoma, a division of Healthcare Service Corporation, a mutual legal reserve company.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the number one way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
The following program contains coarse language and adult themes. Listener discretion is advised.
From red dirt roads to the Capitol steps, Rick's calling truth, no time for regrets. Fire in his voice, facts in his hand, talking sense to the heart of this land. It's the Rick Robinson Show, where the truth rides high. No spin, no script, just an eagle in the sky. From D.C. to Tulsa, he's calling it out. Mic in his hand, yeah, he's got the clout. Heartland Radio, raw and real. Tune in, speak up, and feel what we feel. He's breaking down the noise.
I know. It's Monday again. I'm Rick Robinson. This is my show, and we are doing an in-depth dive into why America 250 isn't the layup that it should have been. And it's not a very simple thing to get through, so it's taken some time. We've done some math on a Monday, and you guys know how I feel about math. Ever since I made a $3,000 mistake on an invoice back in the day, I got really good at it really quick, but doesn't mean I have to like it. All right, so let's dive back in. We've been talking again about kind of the correlation between the centralization of our education system, which started a lot longer ago than anybody wants to admit. The full centralization was finished off in the 80s, but it actually started the centralization process in 65. And then before that, there was the Rockefeller philanthropic redo of our entire education system. Once they figured out it takes about 12 years to indoctrinate people. I mean, you wanted people smart enough to run their machinery, but not really smart enough to do much of anything else. And if you look at today's test scores, they kind of got what they paid for. It took a while, but they got what they paid for. We did some in-depth numbers dives there, and even though I am a policy wonk nerd and a numbers kind of guy, some of them even confused me. So just to recap for a little bit, folks who were basically age 9, math scores dropped by 10 points over the last 40 years in the way that they are typically looked at through the education groups that do the number policy wonky kind of stuff. But we're not going to go too far back into that because, again, it's numbers and policy wonk stuff, and a lot of you are going to start snoring if I do. But again, welcome back in. This is hour 2 of the Rick Robinson Show. In the first hour, we started with looking at America 250 and the strange reality that the country's 250th birthday feels more awkward than it should. We walked through the patriotism data, Gallup, Desiree Pugh, and we looked at the report card reading basically flat over decades, math mixed with a recent backsliding, civics and U.S. history in the basement. Only 22% of 8th graders proficient in civics, only 13% proficient in U.S. history. That is not just an education problem. That is a problem for the entire republic, because a republic depends on citizens who understand what they inherited. America 250 is the symptom. The civic report card is the diagnosis. And when the inheritance is not taught, when civic memory disappears, politics does not become neutral. It becomes a vacuum. And politics hates a vacuum. Something will fill it. And now we talk about what's begun to fill it. Because when civics memory leaves, socialism moves in. The Democratic Socialist of America is no longer just a weird campus label with flyers, tote bags, and a guy named Schuyler. Yes, there are guys named Schuyler, explaining why breadlines are actually misunderstood. This is an organization, an organized political movement. It has chapters, it has candidates and candidate pipelines, it has endorsements, it has theory, it has field operations, it even has a sense of mission. And DSA itself says its national endorsements are not just casual pats on the back. DSA says an endorsement confirms that a candidate's platform aligns with DSA policy. And let that part sink in, that if they're endorsing them, it means that they are aligning with their candidates' platforms and the DSA political platform and their theory of power. And that phrase matters, the one theory of power. They're not just saying we like this candidate. They're saying this candidate fits our project. And that project is increasingly operating inside the Democratic primaries, especially in safe blue districts where a primary is, in fact, the election. And we have a couple things that I'm going to show you. Some of you may be surprised by these, but we're going to show them anyway. All right, so hang on. Let me do this. Nah, I don't like how that looks. All right, maybe for these we will make me small. It's not like I have to be on screen anyway. So these are just some of the folks that are being backed by the DSA. Now, there are other groups, and we may get into more of those as the week goes on, but just wanted to cover the DSA for today, just to kind of give you a bit of a bite-sized sneak as to what's happening inside the Democratic Party. Chris Rabb in Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District is one of the cleanest examples, and you can see some of his information on screen right now. The Working Families Party said it joined Justice Democrats, 1 PA in Philadelphia DSA, to coalesce around Rabb in the PA 03 primary. The Guardian reported that Rabb won the Democratic primary in that deep blue Philadelphia area district, backed by groups including Philadelphia DSA, Justice Democrats, and the Working Families Party. That is not a French candidate yelling from outside the building. That is the socialist-aligned ecosystem winning inside the building. The DSA does not have to take over the Democratic Party all at once. It just has to win the primaries, where the general election is nothing but a formality. And then let's look at New York. New York City DSA has openly promoted candidates. And again, Claire Valdez is one of them, and you'll see her on the screen right now. Yeah, your math's flawed. You need to go back and look. Because the poorest states aren't the red ones, my friend. But thanks for playing. All right, anyway. Sorry, I'm going to go back to my notes now. I don't feel like dealing with the chat today. So the New York City DSA has openly promoted candidates like Claire Valdez and Daryazi Avila Chavalar. I'm probably butchering the hell out of that name, but I don't really care. Reporting has identified Valdez as a DSA member and Mamdani ally running for Congress in New York's 7th District. Avila Chavalar is challenging longtime Rep. Adriano Espilet in New York's 13th District, while with backing from the DSA world and support from Mayor Zoran Mondami. And that matters because this is the pipeline. Local organizing, city power, progressive groups, DSA alignment, primary challenge, safe blue seat, then Congress. Yesterday's fringe is today's primary challenger, and tomorrow's committee member if nobody pays attention. And notice the confidence. They're not hiding the label anymore. They're actually campaigning on it. This brings us to the next group that I want to talk about today, who are now on the screen. You can see similar patterns in other places. Malat Kiros has been identified in Colorado, reporting as a Democratic Socialist challenger to Diana Degati. Cori Bush is attempting a comeback with St. Louis DSA support. Janine Lewis George is endorsed by Metro DC DSA in the DC mayoral race. And I'm not done yet, because there's another group that we're going to be talking about. And this, like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg for the onslaught of Democratic Socialist candidates. And before anybody says, hey, real socialism's never been tried. Yeah, you're wrong there too. But sure, I expect that argument in about 3 seconds. So then we have Chris Bennett, Sean Doherty, and Randy Villegas. California DSA's voter guide has listed or recommended candidates such as Chris Bennett, Sean Doherty, and Randy Villegas, with some framed as DSA endorsed and others as aligned with the broader progressive socialist policy ecosystem. So the DSA has backed them or endorsed, and socialized aligned candidates are moving through Democratic primaries in places like Pennsylvania, New York, Colorado, DC, Missouri, and, of course, commie failure. This is not just one candidate, it's a network. Working Families Party, Justice Democrats, Our Revolution, local DSA chapters, progressive labor activist nonprofits, campus networks, online influencers, and protest organizations are all behind this. The old Democratic machine had smoke-filled rooms. The new left has Discord servers, field organizers, activist nonprofits, and a primary target list. This is not just a candidate list. It is a replacement curriculum with campaign signs. And it really is just that simple. Now, this is where my original post comes back. The Republican Party never really learned its lesson after Reagan granted amnesty on the promise that Democrats would work with him to fix immigration. Now, we can debate the details of 1986 all day. We can talk about the promises, the enforcement failures, the politics of the era, and all the rest, but the larger lesson is obvious. Too many Republicans believed compromise would buy peace, and it did not. Too many Republicans believed if they accepted the framework, funded the system, respected the process, and avoided sounding too mean, the other side would finally operate in good faith. But that's not what happened. The left took over and then moved the goalposts within the institutions. The right complained about the institutions. Then the right funded the institutions. Then the right wondered why the country kept moving left. Education is only one example. Immigration is another. Then we have the media. Universities are another. Corporate culture is another. Everybody talks about why are college degrees so important in the culture of corporations today, because 98% of corporate culture revolves around the same ideas being preached by the DSA. Therefore, if you have a degree from a university that also aligns pretty much 98% with the policies and procedures of the DSA, then you're more likely to fit in within corporate culture. The GOP kept showing up with policy memos to a street fight over our very civilization. And the left understood something Republicans forgot. Win the institutions that form people, and eventually the elections get easier. That is why education matters. That is why civics matters. That is why history matters. That is why America 250 matters, because elections are downstream from formation. If a generation is taught that America is an oppressive system, why would they defend that system? They wouldn't. And they don't. If a generation is taught that rights are just power arrangements, why would they care about constitutional limits? A lot of the younger kids today think the Constitution needs to be used as a birdcage liner. If a generation is taught that socialism is compassion and capitalism is exploitation, why would they resist the DSA candidate offering free everything? Remember, reality check, folks. Nothing in life is free. Everything has strings. If a generation is taught that borders are racist, policing is oppression, and the Constitution itself is outdated, and patriotism is suspicious, why would they preserve the country as founded? The right thought compromise would buy peace. The left used peace talks to redraw the map. And now the GOP wakes up every few years shocked that the culture moved yet again. It moved because the institutions moved. It moved because education moved. It moved because entertainment moved. It moved because the activist ecosystem never clocked out. Republicans kept thinking they were negotiating over policy. The left understood it was fighting over formation. Now, in one of the only international pieces we're going to talk about today, because it ties into what we're talking about right now, Donald Trump is falling into the same kind of trap, in my opinion, when it comes to Iran. He keeps thinking if he goes back to the table with these people and keeps trying to broker for peace, that eventually they're going to listen to him. This is the same mistake that Ronald Reagan made with the Republicans in 1980. And I'm going to say that in the 1980s, I'm going to say this again. This is something that Donald Trump should not have to be dealing with today. But it is on his plate. It is on his plate because of policy failures. This fight with Iran is partially our fault, but it had nothing to do with me or you because most of us weren't alive when these decisions were being made. In the 1950s, I'm going to say this again for those of you that may be listening for the first time. In the 1950s, Iran tried to elect a socialist prime minister. That socialist prime minister who was elected wanted to nationalize their oil industry. What later became British Petroleum was having none of that and started exhorting power or pushing power with its ally us to have that person deposed, which then led to the installation of the Shah, which eventually led to everybody's taste on America souring in that country, which is when in the 1950s, when it started souring, you started hearing phrases coming up in the language at the time of first the Saturday people, then the Sunday people, because they decided they hated us almost as much as they hated Israel because we started meddling in their politics. Then you have the fall in 1979, which again was primarily caused because we decided to start meddling. I'm willing to say that because that is a historical fact. That's why I keep saying this isn't an old war or a new war. This is an old war. This isn't America being Team America World Police. This is America finally deciding that we have to clean up a mess that we helped make. And it wasn't just us. It was the British. That's part of the reason why Donald Trump has been so snippy with the Brits because, hey, we're trying to clean up a mess that my predecessors and your predecessors helped us make. And we can't keep kicking the can down the road anymore. Now, I've said this before. One of the reasons this isn't working is because after World War II, they started tying all of our economies together. Because remember, World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. That wasn't actually a thing, though, because a couple decades later, we found ourselves in another one. So they decided, hey, this can't ever happen again, especially now that we can uncork the sun, because now that we can do it, somebody else is going to eventually be able to do it. So let's tie everybody's economies together because it creates the first version of mutually assured destruction. Because if you bomb somebody back to the Stone Age, which I freely admit Iran's pretty much there already, it's going to be really hard for the rest of the world to hang on because everybody's economies are now tied together. We're seeing those ripples happen all the time, all over the place now. This is why the fall of Greece nearly took out the entire planet. This is why the fall of Venezuela nearly took out the entire planet by design. So part of the reason why I firmly believe Donald Trump is now in a we have to find a way to make a deal with these people frame of mind is twofold. One, he is the king of negotiation. Just ask him, he'll tell you. He did write a book called The Art of the Deal for nothing. And I'm not necessarily slamming the man. I'm just saying sometimes his confidence in himself is astounding. Not saying he hasn't earned that right in a lot of aspects, but sometimes it's a little. And in this case, I don't really think it's going to work the way he wants it to work because we keep trying to, as a Western civilization, look at Middle Eastern civilization and trying to ascribe our political beliefs and our religious beliefs onto them, and they don't match. These people want the world to collapse. I'm not saying Iranians in general. I'm saying the Iranian leadership, they need the world to collapse for their end times to begin. So with us being afraid to trigger the end of the world, which is why we won't just glass the parking lot, or glass them and turn them into a parking lot, and them rooting for the end of the world because they need the world to be bathed in blood for their caliphate to begin. We keep running into an impasse. And it is impossible, I'm going to say this again, it is impossible to negotiate with people who are theologically allowed to lie to you, especially specifically when it involves their survival. So we keep running into all kinds of cultural impasses with these people, which is, again, why I say this should have been dealt with on January 22nd, 1981. We should have just got rid of them then, because by then we were still dealing with a 31-year-old problem-ish that became an even bigger problem 2 years before. But we didn't. It would have been so much easier to take out this little uprising if we had just done it. But we couldn't because Russia was a lot stronger back then, because back then it was the USSR. So I'm not saying there weren't geopolitical reasons why we couldn't do the things that we didn't do back then. I'm just saying, with hindsight being what it is, uprooting the Iranian regime that is in place now would have been a lot easier back then, all things being equal. But it also probably would have led to everybody glowing in the dark. So I perfectly understand why we couldn't do it then. The problem is now we can't really undo it without risking destabilizing the entire planetary economy, because everybody's economies are now tied together. So we find ourselves in a lovely, lovely, lovely catch-22. All right, we're going to go ahead and take the final break of the show. And when we come back, I want to make one careful accuracy stop because this matters. We're going back to the actual topic for today. There are DSA-backed candidates. There are socialist-aligned candidate pipelines. And there are foreign influence concerns about parts of the far-left activist ecosystem. Those are related warning lights, but they're not the same claim. And if we get sloppy, they will use the sloppiness to dismiss the truth. So when we come back, we're going to keep the line straight, the light bright, and then we're going to bring it home to America 250, education, and what conservatives actually have to rebuild. This is the Rick Robinson Show. We'll be back after this musical interruption. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen.
They tried to quench the fire, drown it all in chains, tried to break our will and wash away our names. But every spark they buried only fed the flame. Now the cry of freedom's roaring through the rain. Hear the cry of freedom on the winds of change. Every voice united, breaking every chain. We were born to stand and never bow again.
Welcome back into the program, ladies and gentlemen. Final segment of the "Oh my God, it's Monday again" edition of the Rick Robinson Show. I love how people come into the chat room and then yell things like "This is insane," false justifying, and then never explain why anything I'm saying is false. Love how that happens. Anyway, so we're gonna just keep rolling here because there's plenty of show stuff to still get through. Anyway, welcome back into the program. So again, welcome back. This is the Rick Robinson Show. Before the break, we talked about the DSA-backed, DSA-endorsed, and socialist-aligned pipeline moving through Democratic primaries. We also talked about the Republican failure to understand that politics is not just policy, it is about formation. Now, I want to make one careful distinction before we close the loop, because facts matter. And the truth is already strong enough. There are three related but separate issues here. First, there are DSA-backed, DSA-endorsed, and socialist-aligned candidates entering Democratic primaries. Second, there is a broader progressive socialist ecosystem building infrastructure to move the party further left. Although I don't really know how they could go much further left, but they still seem to be pulling it off. Third, there are foreign influence adjacent concerns about parts of the far-left activist world. There are related warning lights, but they are not the same claim. Do not say Beijing is cutting checks to congressional candidates unless you can prove it. They may not be cutting checks to congressional candidates, but we do know some of the Democratic candidates have been banging Chinese spies. So I don't know how much is the reach between those 2 points. I'm just saying. Do not say socialist nations are directly funding Democratic campaigns unless you have direct evidence. We don't need to overstate the case to make the case. What we can say is that there are serious questions about some far-left activist networks, foreign influence adjacent money, and anti-American protest infrastructures. If you weren't sure about that, just look at how much of this has dried up overall since the formation of things like USAID and other NGOs. Sadly, a lot of NGOs still exist, which is why I think you're seeing a lot of the foreign outside protesters in places like New Jersey. But yeah, if they can make you hate your country by pointing out that it's wrong, that people that broke into the country illegally, and some of which that are rapists and murderers and everything else, are being detained while we determine how quickly we can send them back to from whence they came, or even somewhere else. Yeah, if they can make that a bad thing, of course they're going to do that. So reporting has raised concerns about Neville Roy Singham, a Shanghai-based Marxist millionaire, and money flowing through nonprofit networks tied to groups such as Code Pink and the People's Forum. Critics argue that Singham's Shanghai-based and pro-CCP alignment, oh, damn it, hang on, got to do something because rules.
China is asshole.
Okay, follow the rules. Raise serious questions, but public reporting also makes an important distinction that is not the same thing as proving the Chinese government is directly funding candidates. But again, it's kind of one of those 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon things. So I understand why I have to say this exactly the way that I'm saying it. But still, just saying. So we're going to try to keep the lines distinct, but I'm not willing to say that there may not be some blurring. I'm just trying to be as fair-minded as I can. The issue is not whether every protest sign came with a foreign return address, just usually the ones that look like they were pre-printed. The issue is whether hostile worldview money is helping build the megaphone. There also have been campaign compliance controversies around foreign donations in certain races, and those, again, matter. Foreign donations to campaigns are supposedly illegal, and they're supposed to be treated seriously. But again, there's a difference between improper foreign contributions and proving a foreign government operation. If a campaign took improper foreign donations, that matters, but we do not need to overstate it to make it matter. There are also stories about American donors with financial ties to China-linked or state-backed interests. Damn it, y'all are going to make me push this button a lot today. I think my staff likes when I have to press this
China
button.
is asshole.
All right, so Not every China-linked dollar is a spy novel. God, really, guys? Come on, man.
China is asshole.
Not every China-linked dollar deserves sunlight.
China is asshole.
I'm sorry, it's a rule. So the clean argument is this. The DSA candidate pipeline is real. The socialist-aligned ecosystem is real. The anti-American activist ecosystem has foreign influence concerns that deserve lots and lots and lots of scrutiny. I said it right. I've been mispronouncing that word for a while now and never could figure out why my brain was reading some of the words, the letters backwards. Those things overlap ideologically in places, but we need to keep the factual claims separate. Because if we get sloppy, the folks that don't like us very much, will use the sloppiness to dismiss the truth. And the truth is strong enough, believe it or not. Now, let me make the balance point because that matters too. America does not need propaganda, but it does need to have a memory because it doesn't need things like fake history. America doesn't need propaganda. America does not need schools that pretend slavery did not happen, that pretend Jim Crow didn't happen, the Trail of Tears did not happen, Japanese internment did not happen, or that every American decision was noble and righteous, because we've been discussing some today that were not. That is not civic education. That is fairy tale nationalism. But America also does not need schools that teach failure without inheritance, criticism without gratitude, rights without responsibility, and citizenship without memory. A serious country can tell the truth about its sins and still teach its children why the country is worth preserving. Because again, I'm not trying to justify the Trail of Tears, but understanding why and how that fight got started, I can kind of understand why we went nuclear, so to speak, on the people that were here, on the native population, because they first extended a hand of friendship to us and helped make sure that we didn't starve. We then extended a hand of friendship in return, and our cultures actually started commingling. And then the chiefs of the independent tribes decided that was no bueno. So am I sad that the Trail of Tears happened? Yes, believe it or not, because I know I look like a white kid on camera. I'm part Cherokee and part Sioux. So yes, I have direct skin in the game when it comes to that kind of stuff. And believe it or not, it may not look like it, but it's red. So yes, that part of the history still matters to me too. But that's one reason why I wanted to look, because I was like, look, I know I look like a white guy, but I'm not completely white. I'm Heinz 57. I have a little bit of European stuff. I have some native stuff. I'm Heinz 57. So I needed to understand the history of it, because for the longest time, when it first came to my attention, because I've said this before, but I was really confused as a kid, because we used to have to bring these little cards home where basically your parents filled it out and they checked what nationality belonged to you back when it was, white, Negro, Asian, Indian. It was pretty much the only four choices, and that's how they were worded back then. I remember because I had given it to my parents, and I had gone to my room to get ready to go play outside, and I was coming back to the living room, and they were sitting at the kitchen table, and they were arguing with each other about what box to check. And I'm looking at my arm going, why are they arguing about checking the white box or not? And I remember my dad saying, I don't want anyone in the government to know that a kid of mine or even myself is part native, because again, this was the 70s. I'm not claiming our country was perfect. He looks white. We're going to tell the world he's white, even though he's probably got enough native in him to get some benefits. Although it turns out I didn't, because even though I do have enough percentage, because, it was taboo for folks to get put on the rolls back then, my paternal great-grandmother and my maternal great-great-grandmother, neither one ever put themselves on the rolls, or anyone that came after them. So it wouldn't matter anyway. But that's why I started studying the history of it. And that's when I found out that it isn't as clear cut as they were trying to make it with, first, second, third, and fourth grade history class. because they were sanitizing a lot of things. And we're talking about the fact that if The Hague existed during the revolution, we would have been brought up on war crimes because we weren't following the conventions of war. We weren't lining up and blowing bugles and banging drums and, doing all the things and then lining up and just, taking shots at each other. We didn't do that during the revolution because we knew we couldn't beat them that way. So we used guerrilla tactics over and over and over again. We did it again in the War of 1812. So again, I'm not saying our country is perfect. But what I'm saying is we made a lot of things better. We were the birthplace for modern Western civilization, whether anybody really wants to admit it or not. We didn't, I don't really want to say birthplace, I guess, because I guess the Magna Carta was first, as far as I know, as far as history. But we may not have birthed it, but we damn sure perfected freedom. And now our own freedoms are being used to destroy us from within. And again, I'm not saying we can't talk about the serious stuff. I'm asking why we stopped talking about the serious stuff. Why we started letting things like the 1619 Project take hold. Because that's not accurate. Why we started talking about how police departments were actually originally formed as slave catchers. That's not correct either. Hell, in New York City, the first police officers were former slaves themselves. They were Irish. That's another thing. Yes, I know. I look white. And it's summertime, so I'm starting to tan a little bit. But you can still see lots of freckles. You know why? Because I'm part Irish. Which means not only was my ancestry subjected to the Trail of Tears, I also have ancestors who would have, if they'd come over a little earlier, been considered slave labor. You don't hear me bitching. So this is what makes America worth teaching, not because we never failed, but because we learned from our failures. The immigration policies that we have today were outlined from us looking back and going, hey, granted, we didn't necessarily start that fight, but we may have escalated it a little too far, a little too fast, and we should probably make sure that the next groups that try to come over here don't come over here for colonization, but come over here as assimilation. Then you fast forward to 2022, I believe, and you have Ilhan Omar talking about with her constituency on camera, telling everybody, my people did not come here to assimilate. They came here to colonize. I don't know about y'all, but I had little spidey senses going off all over the... Wait. What happened the last time a group tried to colonize here? Eventually, fights were picked, and people that were here originally lost. Will that happen again? I don't really know, but that's why we have the immigration policies that we have, is to try to stop things like this from happening. So all the bleeding heart buttheads are like, borders are nothing but a line on a piece of paper. No, they exist for a reason. They exist because we looked at our history. We looked at the things we got right. We looked at the things that we got wrong. And we decided, hey, we should probably have policies and procedures for how and when people are allowed to come over here. And I don't always agree with those policies and procedures either. I'm not saying that we don't need to take a hard, long look at trying to make it less expensive to immigrate here if we can prove that you are coming here to try to not only enrich your life, but make America better. I'm willing to have those conversations. But I wasn't willing to have them before we closed the border. And I'm still not willing to have them when we have millions of people running around inside the country who shouldn't be here in the first place. And for those of you that are about to go, well, you're just about... No, I'm going to say this again. Look, unless your windows are open, your doors are unlocked, your keys are in your car, and there's a note on your refrigerator that says, hey, welcome into my home. Anything that is mine is yours. You're welcome to use it for as long as you need to stay here and enjoy. And I don't want to hear anything from you about America needing to have open borders, because you enforce your own borders in your own home and in your own neighborhoods every single day. And we saw this most blatantly in deep blue Nantucket. Anybody remember what happened there? A handful, and I do mean a literal handful of immigrants got shipped to the island. And they did photo ops and they did feedings and they said, hey, we got our 5 minutes out of this. Y'all got to go. And then they shipped them off to a military base on a bus. So, yeah, y'all can just suck it. So, again, what makes America worth teaching isn't the fact that we failed, but it's because our founding ideas gave future generations the tools to challenge those actual failures. That is the part too many students never hear. They hear the indictment, but not the inheritance. They hear the failures, but not the correction. They hear the guilt, but not the grace. They hear the sins, but not the striving. They hear America described as a crime scene, but not as a country that has spent 250 years arguing, bleeding, correcting, expanding, and sometimes dying to make its promises more real. And if America 250 feels awkward, maybe the problem is not the fireworks. Maybe the problem is that too many people were never taught what the fireworks actually stand for. And this is why I will not stop doing what I can. Never. I know sometimes it feels like those of us who truly love and understand America are a dying breed, but dying breeds do not have to go quietly. They can teach. They can speak. They can run for office. They can organize. They can build. And most of all, if nothing else, they can vote. And even taking all of that out of the equation, they can raise children and grandchildren who know the story. They can support schools that teach truth with gratitude. They can challenge politicians who keep funding systems that they claim to oppose. They can stop apologizing for loving the country. The answer is not despair. The answer is reconstruction. Rebuild civic education locally. Put history back in the center of the school day. Demand curriculum transparency. If you have to make it happen, and you can, run for local school boards. I say this all the time. National politics is sexy. It's where the money is. It's how I get paid most of the time. But where the real sausage gets made and where it matters most is local and going all the way down to the school board. It can be the school board. It can be city council. It can be mayor. Those are where real policy that affects everyday people get made all the time. Because no matter what, as much as I rail about the federal government and everything else, there are safeguards in place that make the turning of the ship very, very slow. But this is also another reason that people like me get very frustrated, because the Democrats have been in charge more often than they have not. So they get credit for all the times the economy looks good, when in reality, it's a lot of the policies that they rail against that start correcting the ship. But because it didn't happen fast enough and we have the attention span of gnats and have had for quite some time, we go, we tried, y'all didn't get enough done, we're going to give the reins back to the other side. And then the economy turns around because of the work that was done before them, but they get all the credit. And it's just dumb. I mean, Barack Obama was able to blame George W. Bush for the economy for 6 out of 8 years of his presidency. But Donald Trump was supposed to turn it around in a day. I will admit, some of that was his own fault, because he was saying things that were hyperbolic, and not realizing that some people don't really grasp hyperbole anymore. And I get that too. Especially the left, when they can use it as a weapon. Which, according to them, they're the only ones who understand hyperbole, unless the other side uses it, and then everything's literal. Just saying. So again, run for school boards. Support teachers who still believe America is worth teaching. Teach your own kids and grandkids the story, even if the system won't. Stop letting the people who dislike America be the only ones explaining America to your children. America 250 shouldn't be a funeral pyre for patriotism. It should be a wake-up call. The question is whether we still have enough civic memory left to hear the alarm. All right, well, we're coming to the end of the show today, so let's bring this all home. We started with America 250. 250 years after the Declaration, the country should be preparing for a celebration that feels natural and shared. Instead, it feels awkward, cautious, and divided. Then we looked at the patriotism data. Again, according to Gallup, only 58% of U.S. adults are extremely or very proud to be American, a record low in its trend, with Republicans at 92%. So I would like to point out patriotism is not a Republican problem. I'm surprised. I'll be honest. I expected it to be probably around 99, but I'll take 92. Independents at 53%, and Democrats 36%. Desiree News found patriotism declining ahead of the 250th anniversary, with major partisan and generational splits. Pew found Americans no longer even share the same sources of national pride, and only 3% named U.S. history as something that makes them proud. Then we looked at education. The federal education doorway opened in 1965. The Department of Education began operating in 1980. Standards and accountability expanded in the 1990s. No Child Left Behind intensified the testing regime after 2002. Race to the Top used grant leverage under Obama. Democrats built much of the federal education house. Republicans helped install the testing machinery. Obama-era Democrats added the grant money leash, and now both parties are standing in the wreckage, arguing over who left the stove on. And then we looked at the report card. Reading is basically flat from 1980 benchmark. Math has some long-term gains, but serious recent declines. Civics and U.S. history are the gut punch. Only 22% of 8th graders are proficient in civics, and only 13% are proficient in U.S. history. Then we asked when history and civics got pushed aside. Civics began declining as a priority in the 1960s. The standards movement squeezed the school day in the 1990s. No Child Left Behind accelerated the squeeze after 2002, because what gets tested gets taught, and what does not get tested gets treated like a luxury. Which is another reason why, if you have kids in school today, you realize that a lot of things you and I took for granted, like wood shop and metal shop and all those things, don't really exist very much anymore. And then we looked at the consequences. When civic memory leaves, socialism moved in, because as we all know, everything in nature abhors a vacuum. Politics is no different. DSA-backed, DSA-endorsed, and socialist-aligned candidates are moving through Democratic primaries in places like Pennsylvania, New York, yes, even Colorado, Washington, D.C., and, alarmingly enough, Missouri, and surprising absolutely no one, commie failure. The broader ecosystem includes DSA chapters, Working Families Party, Justice Democrats, Our Revolution, progressive labor activists, nonprofits, and online organizing. And then we drew the bright red line on the foreign influence and did my best to try to keep claims precise, but again, kind of feel like it's more of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing. DSA-backed candidates are one issue. Socialist-aligned candidate pipelines are another. Foreign influence-adjacent activist networks are another. Related warning lights, not identical claims. And accuracy matters, and did my best to try to stay accurate, because the truth is already strong enough. So here's my final thought. America doesn't need propaganda. It needs memory. America doesn't need children taught fairy tales. America needs children taught the truth, the whole truth, including the failures, the corrections, the ideals, the sacrifices, and all of those things that turned into the American inheritance. Because a country that cannot explain itself cannot defend itself. A country that cannot teach its young why it matters cannot and should not be shocked when they decide it doesn't. And a country that treats civics as extra credit will eventually be governed by people who never learned the assignment because they didn't take the class. We did not stop teaching America all at once. We just slowly moved it to the edge of the school day until the country itself became extra credit. America 250 is not the problem. It is the mirror. And if we do not like what we see in that mirror, then it's time to stop asking why patriotism is not cool anymore and start rebuilding the institutions that teach people why America is worth loving in the first place. That's where we start the process to land the plane today. But before I close everything out, I want to remind everybody that in 1976, the economy was a million times worse than it is today. In 1976, we had one of the most unpopular, around that time, we had the most unpopular presidency of all time in 1976. That was just before Jimmy Carter. Just before. If I'm doing the math right, because it would have been what, 70, yeah, 77 to 81. But we're talking about around the same time that there were gas lines and everything else starting to happen, we still had the bicentennial celebrations everywhere. I've talked to people who weren't 3 years old who remember the flags everywhere, the red, white, and blue bunting everywhere, the local events, the national events everywhere. And now we've got a president trying to reignite those kind of things, but getting pushback from the same people who were fine appearing with Barack Obama, but not him. If you're going to draw one line, you have to draw the other. I will say this before we get ready to close things out. I saw the president, who I do agree with, probably about 80-20, if I'm being honest. There are things that I disagree with him on, and for those of you who know my history, you know in 2016 I didn't vote for him. I was terrified to vote for him. But once he started flying the plane and I realized the things that he was doing were actually working, I decided maybe to give him a chance, just like I did with Obama before him and everybody before them. And yeah, so I will say this. I saw him post that since everybody's canceling, he's talking about turning the America 250 event in DC into a rally. I think that's the wrong approach. I think you need to extend invitations to groups that aren't afraid to stand up for America and have them come round it out instead of making the event about you. Because, Mr. President, I have come to respect you, but not everything has to be about you. This is about America. This is about our 250th birthday. And if Carter had done this, half the country probably wouldn't have shown up then either. Or I guess it wouldn't have been Carter. Wasn't it Ford before Carter, I think? I don't know. Like I said, I was only 3 in 76. So, but I do have firsthand memory of, I think, probably being 4 or 5 years old and waiting in gas lines. That was fun. My parents drove a red Maverick at the time. For those of you who don't remember what those cars were, kind of like a Gremlin, a little bit. Remember those? With a little hatchback. And I used to climb in the back while we were waiting in the gas line and pretend I was Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica. Yeah. Always been a sci-fi nerd. Never hid that fact. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this one. My name is Rick Robinson. This is my show. Now, today, I'm going to be honest, I woke up with a not-so-friendly tummy, which is why we started an hour later. However, we've had pretty phenomenal numbers for starting an hour later, so we're going to test this again on Wednesday, and then I may make a permanent move. Yeah. Anyway, again, want to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out with me today. Even those of you who came into my chat to ridicule me and then make false claims about how red states are the poorer states. Yeah, let's talk about the salt tax. Let's talk about the salt tax. Yes, exactly. Department of Education is and has been a hot mess. I will go even further to say for a long time, but pretty much since its inception. All right, let's get out of here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, enjoy the rest of your Monday. Even you haters, thank you for inflating my numbers. Bye, everybody.
Talk for the people, talk that's real. The Rick Robinson Show, where we say what we feel.
Say goodnight, Gracie.